What was the biggest bullet you dodged? My dad was a truck driver in the oil field in Canada. He worked a lot of long hours and every single day. So on weekends, he would bring me and my younger brother on some of his jobs. We were on location and my little brother, 3 and me, 10 were waiting for him playing in cab of truck. My little brother opened the passenger door and my little arms closed it. Job's done. We start our trek home going about 35 km/h and the door flies open and I get sucked out of truck. I remember doing about 10 backflips as I tumbled out, hitting the ground on my back a few times and rolling my way to a stop. I stood up before the truck was even stopped in absolute shock. Next thing I see my dad looking for me, and he burst into tears. First time I ever seen him cry. I'm 33 now and he still won't talk to me about it. Luckily the rig was in a farmer's field. So when we were leaving I landed on softer dirt. Not a single scratch. On me, Dad thought he ran over me with trailer. Don't think we ever went to work with Dad again. I work for the company now. I fell out of a farm truck I was about 8, going about 35 down a just out of town stretch of highway. I bounced a few times and came to a stop just about to the shoulder of the road. I remember overwhelming certainty that I was going to die, and I rolled to the ditch. Missed getting run over by about 10 inches. Got up, my mom had come back for me and immediately took me to the ER, where I was given a total clean bill of health. Not a bump, though I did have a nasty bruise where I hit the road initially. Who knew kids were made of rubber? Years ago, I lived in Vancouver and liked to go for long walks, beautiful city to do so. I was heading to a friend's first to drop something off, and then cut through a neighborhood with a lot of Southeast Asian immigrants. The ones I got to talk to were mostly from Vietnam. I was aware of a van behind me, but it was midday, and there were people out, so it was only a passing thought. A lady was working in her garden, and as I approached, she started to look behind me. Then she came out onto the sidewalk and started talking to me in her native language. I understood none of it, but her body language was agitated. She kept gesturing to me to come with her up their walkway. As I look behind me, I see 3 men getting out of the van, which is now parked just behind me. By this point, the woman has a good grip on my arm and has me dragged almost to her porch. She kept talking and pointing to stuff in her garden, and I just listened, nodded, and kept a good eye on the men in van. I don't remember how long we were there, but the men finally left. Both myself and the woman let out huge sighs of relief. She then patted me on the arm, said something, and then went back to her gardening. I'd booted it to my friend's house. On the news the next day was the story of a woman who was kidnapped and gang raped. The victim was grabbed on the next street over from the woman's house. Not long after my encounter with her, about 5 men in a van. The men were distinctive, and the description of the men in van fit the ones I had seen. That woman saved me from something horrible, and I am forever thankful. A few years ago, I had pneumonia, but my whole family insisted that it was just postnasal drip, which runs in the family. After a week or two, I woke up in the middle of the night when I couldn't feel my arm. After I got to the ER, the doctor said that it was the worst he'd ever seen, and he was surprised I wasn't dead. I had 3 pounds of mucus cut out of my lungs and another 2 weeks in the hospital siphoning out the rest. For 3 months afterwards, I could barely walk half a mile without starting to pass out, and I still can't run for more than 200-300 yards without collapsing. Around 30,000 pounds. I was driving with my wife in town one snowy evening, and we had pulled up to a stoplight. I happened to glance up at the rear view mirror and saw a city bus heading towards us and rotating sideways. I hit the gas and pulled ahead into the intersection and left into the turning lane, and less than a second later, the bus went sliding through right where our car was. It came to a stop on the other side of the intersection and fortunately didn't hit anything, but 1 second or 2 feet difference, and we would have had some nice spinal injuries. Many years ago, my flight had just landed at Chicago O'Hare and the plane was taxiing when the pilot suddenly slammed on the brakes. People were literally thrown forward against the seat in front of them. A few seconds later, another plane, taking off I think, went screaming by right in front of us. No explanation was given, though our imaginations provided a lot of gory details. As a kid, after running errands in town with my mom, I was climbing into the back seat of our family station wagon. A semi-truck hit a power line pulled out the street, causing the still-live wire to fall, bounce off the roof of the car, and hang across the open door just a foot or 2 above my legs. Raised Catholic, I wondered for a while after if I had actually died that day and that the rest of what I thought was my life was my purgatory. Poor you as a kid. I often had a particular nightmare about the apocalypse and doomsday when I was little because the church talked about the end of days and the second coming of God. I had an aunt who would make us watch movies about such topics. I sometimes still have that dream, always the same dream since I was little. A friend had lost his job under suspicious circumstances. A few weeks later, he asked me to take him to the bank. As I got near to pick him up, I caught a train. He called to say never mind, he would get someone else. A few days later, a friend sent out a message to a large number of our friends. This guy lost his job and was running a check cashing con. Can you cash this check? For me, I'll pay you $50 if you do. The check is $500. He has no backing funds. You eat the whole amount. He did this to several friends in a few days to amass a few grand and was about to skip town when the cops got him. My newborn needed to be rushed to a super high-level NICU to be put into a state of induced hypothermia because he only had hours before he would suffer permanent brain damage. I live in a small town in the middle of nowhere. The small town next door just barely upgraded their hospital to have the hypothermia suite, one of only a few in Texas. He's doing great, no sign of any damage. Not me, but I had a field service engineer working on one of my big robotic liquid handlers. He decided to bypass the safety pin that prevents the heads from moving while the cover is open while he had a diagnostic program queued up on the computer. What he didn't know was that the instant he reinserted the safety pin, the machine would execute the cued instructions and start moving, and he had a hand inside it right in the danger zone. I grabbed his shoulder and yanked his hand out an instant before it was crushed. He stopped ignoring me when I told him to stop bypassing safety lockouts to save a few minutes. I stayed up all night before a day trip to Hong Kong. You know the days when you haven't slept, you're just kinda robotic and doing the human stuff. Nearly zero awareness of anything. Well, I went to cross the street and my friend behind me snatched my shoulder and yanked me backwards just in time to feel the whoosh of a double-decker bus breezing past us. I just looked at him like, oh, thanks man. And it took a whole extra minute for my brain to process I would be dead had he not grabbed me. I think I saved a baby's life once. It was in a city center, crossing a main road with a wild bunch of other people. The dad was pulling the pram behind him onto the pavement while he texted on his phone, and the dumb didn't realize he'd left the pram just there on the road while he himself was on the pavement. Everyone kinda ignored it while the traffic lights kept that section of road clear, but then the lights changed and the moron still hadn't looked up from his phone while a huge double-decker was bearing down on his offspring. Out of the whole crowd, I was the only one to push forward and pull the pram onto the pavement. The complete imbecile gave a grunt of surprise and dropped his phone as the bus whooshed past, and he realized he'd utterly failed in his parenting responsibilities, which was consolation. I hope it shattered.